Hi everybody, this is Everyday Commentary. I wanted to do a video on fit and finish. And so what you see before you are two custom knives and then 3 production knives. And so let's talk about the production knives first. So the 3 knives that you see in front of you are the Gerber 39 liner lock, the Indian River Jack from Northwood Knives, and the Spedico Techno. These 2 knives were made in America, and this knife was made in Taichung, Taiwan. And so let's start with the best. So this is my Techno. I've had this knife for more than 2 years now, and it is flawless. It is. I know that there are Technos that have problems. Andrews has a little rattle in the back, but this iteration, this version, this actual unit of the Techno is just incredible. There's no centering issues. There's no blade play. There's no lock wiggle. I mean, everything about this knife is just solid. And as you can see, the lock up there is still pretty early. It flips well. It's almost like it's on bearings, but it's not. And it has a really good detent. You can see it suck in. The handles are nicely finished. They got that nice stonewash to them. The blade is nicely finished. It's got a little sort of smoky stonewash to it. And just everything about this knife is absolutely perfect. There's nothing I would change. I mean, even if you get to like really nitpicky details, like you unlock the lock, there's no blade wiggle here. I mean, you can rotate it, but there's no wiggle around the pivot, meaning that this knife is just really tight in there. You look at things like the plunge line. The plunge line is very sharply cut, and let's see if we can get it there. And it's kind of not getting. But there we go. Plunge line is almost perfectly symmetrical, even though this is a production knife. It's really good. The ricasso, the true ricasso, the true choil, is very well done. The edge is even all the way around the knife. I mean, even if I'm being super picky, there's not much. I mean, you can see there's just a little bit of flare out there, but then not much. There's very little I could complain about with this knife. So this is an example of what I think is probably about as good as you're going to get on a production knife in terms of fit and finish. The pivots never come loose, though I can tell you that things like my Strider, my Hinderer, and my Sebenza both have pivots that all 3 have pivots that came loose. So I had to tighten them down or Loctite them. I've done nothing to this knife, and it's been great. And I've used it quite a bit, and it's still great. So this is an example of what I would say is probably about as good as you're going to get on a production knife, like a 10 on the scale of 1 to 10 in terms of fit and finish. This knife is also really well finished. I mean, the walk and talk is good. It's a little stiff, but the grind is excellent. You can see there that the grind is very good. There's a true choil. You can see even here there's no flare out at the end. I mean, the grind is pretty even all the way down. It has really nice, well polished backspacer, excellent bone handles. There is one place though that I would point out that makes this not quite as flawless as the Techno. So you can see here that I'm trying to find it now. Okay, yeah, there it is. So you can see here that there's like a little tiny space right at the end. Let's see if I can do this. There you go. So you can see that the bolsters kind of come, the handle covers kind of come up from the scale. If you squeeze it really hard, you can kind of get it to move. The reality is, I don't really consider this much of a defect. Number 1, it has no impact on performance. Number 2, bone is a natural material, and so no matter what you're going to do, it's going to move around more than a metal or something like G10 or FRN. And so while this knife has a little defect there, like just a tiny gap. I mean, it's even hard for me to see through the camera. It might be hard for you to see. That's why I use the card to illustrate the difference. It's something that I think is definitely acceptable, and it doesn't dissuade me from carrying or owning the knife at all. And I would certainly buy another one if I got a chance. So that little thing is not going to be something that concerns me. But if you're really particular, you got to be careful with natural materials because there's just nothing you can do. I mean, you can come back and you can glue it down again, or you can clamp it down again. You could reinstall the pivot, and it's going to come out again. I mean, there's just it's going to move around. Natural materials absorb moisture in the air. They expand, they contract, they shrink. I mean, in older versions of this, in older versions of knives with bone handles, you can see that they start to check as they dry out. I mean, you've been to a collector's show and you see some of these old slip joints, and they're just, you know, they show their wear. I mean, the natural materials will change over time. So this is something that's not quite as perfect as this, but it's still definitely well within acceptable range for me. You notice like the centering's fine and everything like that. Now, here's a knife that I just got in for review. I got it in for review on Thursday, and I'm making this video on Sunday. And it has the worst fit and finish I've ever seen on any knife. And I will note that Gerbers are generally pretty terrible, but this is a Gerber that's from their high-end line. This is a Gerber that's supposedly made in America, and you know, like there's a dent in the bolster. The transition between the bolster and the micarta handle is really rough. I mean, you can see it's like, I mean, it's just it's really thick and obvious. The micarta is well done. I mean, it's smooth here, but it's textured here, and that's only because it's contoured. So that you know, that's one of those things that you're just gonna have to deal with micarta. I like the clip. The clip looks great. It's not too pokey. But here's the real problem. Ready? Okay. So the first thing first. If you look here, you can see that the liner lock is all the way over. There's no more room for this to go. So I don't exactly know how it's going to wear in, because I'm not sure if you can see this, but the detent is actually touching the liner on the opposite side. So this is about as tight as it's going to get. Now here's the real thing, the thing that drives me nuts. Okay, the knife won't close. And it won't close because it's so off-centered that then as it's closing, the portion of the knife that's flat, you know, where it's no longer ground away, hits the liner. And you can listen. It sounds like a pair of scissors. Because, look, you can see it. I mean, it's so off-centered that it's not just rubbing, but it's precluding the knife from closing. You know, this knife, it retails for like $80, so it's not super cheap. And it is just 100% garbage. There's a ding here on the back in the area where you can see it's right there. I mean, it's just, there's all kinds of problems with this knife, which is a real shame because it could have been good. I mean, it has S30V steel, and you can see here, look at this. There's a portion here where the guy just didn't grind it to the end. And I know that, you know, there's not a true ricasso, but if you look at something like, well, let me grab my Dragonfly real quick. So the Dragonfly also doesn't have a true sharpening ricasso. You can compare the edge. I mean, you're losing quite a bit in terms of cutting edge there, just because I didn't bother finishing it to the end. It has a real thick cutting bevel, which I like, but just about everything else about this knife is awful. And it's also really hard to close because the bolster covers up almost all of the access to the liner lock, which is really strange because they made a cutout in the liner. So the bolster just covers the part of the knife that they had designed as the access point for the blade. And then you have Mr. Scissors. So that's just a terrible, terrible example of production knife fit and finish. One of the worst I've ever seen. And so let's take a look at custom knives, because even though custom knives are supposed to be these beautiful, perfect things, they often aren't perfect. So for example, this is my Steve Carroll SES. And when I first got the knife, it had a silver pivot, but the pivot kept coming loose. And I Loctited it with blue 242, and it didn't hold it still, and the knife would wander off center. So I sent it back to Steve. He put this black screw in, which is fine, and it's been centered ever since. I mean, it's pretty darn close to perfectly centered, and it hasn't loosened up. But there are other things about this knife. I mean, this knife has an exceptionally complicated grind. So, like, on a difficulty score, you know, like in diving, this is like, you know, way, 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 way harder than something like this. With it, you know, basically just a simple flat grind. I mean, there's like multiple facets and all that kind of stuff. But you can see here, like, You know, there's not a true ricasso, and you can see that the cutting edge kind of wobbles a little bit as it approaches the heel of the blade here. Now, the plunge line is pretty good, pretty darn good. But there are certain things that, you know, like I said, this knife is not perfect. You can see here it's kind of less pronounced on this side, but here it's really wobbly. It wobbles right there, but it's not something that ever affects performance. And overall, the knife is really quite good. So I was like, whatever. I keep it. It doesn't bother me. I'm not gonna send it back for that. That's ridiculous to have that fixed. So that's an example of a production knife, or a custom knife. Now this is a different custom. This is a Brian Fehlholter Compact Dauntless, and it is a true piece of work. I mean, this knife, there is literally no flaw on this knife. I mean, I've owned this knife for more than a year now. I've carried it and used it. I can find nothing wrong with it. Nothing at all. I mean, even this guy had a little bit of imbalance from side to side on the drop on the plunge line. You know, just a very slight amount. But this Fehlholter Dauntless, let me see if I can get this to work. Let's try it that way. I mean, this Fehlholter Dauntless is just insane. There is nothing I could complain about with this knife. I mean, even when I undo the wiggle, I mean, there's just nothing at all that's a flaw in this knife. I mean, this is finger flush. You know, like I can't even catch it with my finger now. You might be able to hear it though. No, it's so flush and so smooth that it's perfect all the way around. There's just no flaw here. And so, as you can see, you know, there's a diversity of levels of fit and finish. And I think that most of the stuff that we complain about, it's really just a way to knock the manufacturer, which is fine. I mean, like, I'm gonna mention in a review if the fit and finish isn't perfect, but I don't really. It's not gonna dissuade me from carrying something. You know, like I carry this knife and I carry this knife and I carry this knife and I carry this knife. It's when you get to the point of stuff like this where it's like Mr. Scissors that you're like, this is garbage, and it's affecting performance. It's affecting the way you use and carry the knife. It's affecting the way the knife wears in. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this knife, because if I review it as it is, I mean, it's going to get a very low score, but I'm also going to note that it's not worth carrying because it's just a piece of shit. So this is on loan from Blade HQ, so I might ask Blade HQ if I can send it in for a warranty repair, because it's so bad. It's not even, I mean, it's like, I mean, it won't close. You have to really clip it in. So I might ask them if I can send this into a warranty repair and see how Gerber does on their warranty repairs. You know, no one's perfect. Gerber has the worst track record of any manufacturer I've ever seen. But, you know, maybe I can send it back to them and they'll fix it up. Because there is some potential here. It's just, as it is, it's a non-starter. And the rest of these, you know, like this one has a couple of things that are odd, and this one has the scale that lifts up and stuff like that. But I don't really think that those are, you know, flaws that would make me not want to buy the knife. So, there you go. The overview of the fit and finish on various knives. When you get a chance, go on over to Everyday Commentary, go to Gear Geeks Live and take a look and listen.